From New York, especially to be with us. Not only is she the daughter of a very famous father, the sister of a very famous sister, but you must have noticed her name on the credits of Centennial, currently running on BBC One each Tuesday. Now, we haven't actually seen her appear in Centennial yet, which is one reason why I'm particularly pleased to see her here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Lynn Redgrave.
Music from one of the cheapest and shortest films ever made, of
It
course.
was very good for you, although you keep trying to forget it.
It was very nice indeed, yes.
You were actually fat in that film. I mean,
yes,
you're
rather
fantastic
fat, yes.
now.
Well,
how on earth did you get that shape?
Time passes and old age, and it's called deprivation, is how I do it. A great deal of depriving and starvation, and I did it, yes.
Anyhow, let's forget Georgie Girl for a wee while and
Very
talk
good.
about Centennial, which,
Yes.
as Clive James would say, is one of those series which has every actor in the world in it, and we haven't seen you yet.
Have a lot. No, I come on in chapter 7. They call it chapters because, of course, it's from James Michener's book of Centennial. And I come on in chapter 7 when I'm 17 years old, and I end up 85 years old in chapter 11. And I enjoyed that a lot. It was lovely, you know, carrying the character right the way through like that.
But if we believe the newspaper reports, I mean, they had horrendous problems making that series.
Well, very difficult. You see, it took, I mean, this is, 25 hours of film. And they began it in March of last year, and they finished up in December. Now, I didn't start until August, but in March, you know, they had hailstorms, and they'd go up a great big mountain in Colorado where it's very, very high, and they'd shoot the scene, and the snow would come down, and they'd have to send the snow plows up to get the trucks all the way down again. And we didn't have that. We had good weather, but we had the altitude, because if you're working at, 6,500 feet, you forget that the oxygen is very, very thin up there. And there's one particular scene, very dramatic scene, and we're out on this range, on this, outside my big ranch, and we hear the shot. I won't tell you why we hear the shot, but we hear the shot and we have to run up. Myself and William Atherton and Cliff DeYoung run up this hill. We only had to run up, you know, a couple of inches, just out of sight of the camera. And you don't really realize how it hits you. You run a couple of steps and you come into view in the camera going, like this, and you're absolutely, you know, it's very, very hard to breathe indeed. In fact, you do acclimatise to it, but a couple of years before that, I'd been in Denver doing a play. I'd been on tour with a play called The Two of Us by Michael Frayn, and I used to find this very hard playing comedy at altitude because you have to keep, you can't get one line out in one breath, you know, and you can't top the laugh because you're out of breath, you know, and it's very difficult. And we took a ride up something called Mount Evans, which is the highest auto route in the United States, and you go up to 13,500 feet. And at the top, there's this little cafe. And these girls are students who work there who've taken a summer job, and they're all a bit peculiar. I mean, they're terribly sweet, but they look a bit...
Mad?
Yes, they're slightly mad. They've got these silly grins on their faces all the time. And they're up there for 3 months at 13,500 feet, and they're feeling a bit, you know, they're a little slow in their response. And don't drink a martini before you go to 13,500, because you get the tingling of the hands. And my son, in fact, wanted to collect some rocks, and he ran across the car park, picked up a rock, came running back into the cafe where all these strange girls were beaming in an extraordinary manner, and just passed out right across the table, lay there for a couple of minutes and woke up again, and he was fine. But it's very, very difficult. No wonder they're a bit mad.
It's also difficult to boil water at that altitude.
Yes, can't boil water, can't make a barbecue. 2.5 hours to get the charcoal going, and don't bake a cake. They give you special instructions. It says on the packets, the cake mix that you buy in like a supermarket in Colorado will say altitude instructions, you know. If you are over 6,000 feet, put your oven to 400 and something and leave it in for an extra 2.5 minutes, and don't use a certain flour or something. It's very difficult, so I didn't do any baking in Colorado. I left all that to somebody else.
Just coming back to Centennial for a minute, they had some kind of headache toward the end when they were supposed to shoot a dust storm?
Oh, yes. Well, I was in that part. We'd been doing just fine until number 11, when I am, in fact, 85 years old. And incidentally, the makeup to it takes 3 hours to put on, you know, because I'm not quite 85 yet, you know, I'm only 80, and it's very difficult. So we had to travel so far to the locations that my makeup call would usually be 3:30 in the morning in the hotel. 3 hours of putting on this stuff and making me, by which time, of course, you feel very old. I mean, by the time you actually get to the location, and you're at a high altitude, and you were working late the night before, I mean, you feel 140 by the time they actually say, turn the cameras, you know. So people say, how do you play an old part? The answer is get up early, at altitude, you know, have a martini and stagger on. And if you like what you see in Chapter 11, that's the answer. But come the end of it, it was kind of, I think, end of November, December, and we still had a section of the story which concerned the great dust bowl of the 1930s, which, when these terrible dust storms would come, and particularly the wives of the settlers, you know, who maybe have this little tiny cottage in the middle of nowhere, and they would go absolutely mad. They would really lose their minds. They'd wake in the morning and everything would be covered in dust. The baby would be covered in dust. They'd be covered in dust. And it was very, very frightening, in fact. But this huge blizzard finally came, and there's snow everywhere, and it's 30 degrees below freezing, and the film is breaking in the camera and snapping, and, you know, frostbite on the poor operator's hands. And some of the actors, myself included, were sort of stuck in this hotel playing hearts and poker and I don't know what till, because they couldn't use us. And there was no way. They were bringing all this dust in from California to swirl it around with a lot of machines, you know, make it look like a great big dust bowl.
Phony dust.
Phony dust, sort of dried cornflakes or something. I don't know what it is they use. They use something like cornflakes for it. In fact, they used to use bleached cornflakes for snowstorms. You know, when you see in the movies, see a lovely snowstorm, it's bleached cornflakes, but they can't get those anymore. So they use marble dust and some sort of polythene stuff, and you know, if you get it wet, you turn into a rock of marble or something. It was very peculiar. But they had all this dust coming from California, and thousands of tons of it, and the lorry jackknifed in a mountain. Probably the driver had a martini, I should think, was probably why. And so in the end, they had to ship us back to California, and we shot that particular part in. There was no way, you know, there was snow everywhere, and there was no way we were going to get it, so we went back.
Listen, how long have you now lived in America, in New York?
Well, I've lived there 5 years. I actually lived full-time. I married, my husband and I got married there in '67, and he was living there then, and I kind of inveigled him back to England.
But you've held on to that British accent.
Again.
I mean, it's
well,
still...
I do, but you know, you see, I've been here a couple of days. When I've been in New York a while, you see, both my children are real Yankee kids, you know, and it's all right on, Ma, and all that, you know. And I tend to lose my accent a bit. So when I phone people, I get here and I say hello in what I think is my normal voice. And their voices sound funny because my ears hearing them. So they usually say, hello. Oh, hello, Linny, you're sounding very American, you know. And I think I'm not sounding American at all. Now, after a few days, I notice that their voices sound normal, and they say I sound English, and I ring home, and my children say to me, Ma, what's happened? You know, you sound English, oh my God, you know. And my son, in fact, came over last year, stayed up with my husband's family up in near Manchester. And within a couple of days, he was sounding very English, and it was all, hello, Mummy, and how are you, and everything. And but it's sort of bilingual, I think. You know,
but it's curious how you often do find people in a foreign country will still hold on.
Oh yes, well I find that a lot. There was a lady one day I met in California, and I hear English accents very strongly when I'm over there. You know, if I'm in a supermarket and I suddenly hear an English accent of any sort, it hits me, you know, stands out to me. So I said to one lady who was at the checkout counter, she was, and I said, she said, you know, hello dear, how are you? You know, and I said, oh, fine. I said, I hear an English accent. She said, yes, oh yes, English, yeah. I said, how long have you been here? She said, 28 years. I thought, well, that's fun. I said, well, you haven't lost your accent? No, oh no, I live, you know, living in Malibu, and it's very nice in California. I said, well, I suppose you go back all the time. She said, no, I haven't been back for 25 years. I haven't been back there. You know, and she hadn't lost it at all, which is lovely, because she'd kept on to her identity and her own thing, and yet she was very American. I said, well, are you an American citizen? She said, oh, yes, American citizen now. I'm American. I'm a Yank, you know.
But, you know, on the subject of accents, I must tell you that I saw a film, quite an old film that you've been in on television a few weeks ago.
It's a lot of old ones, yes, not so many new ones, unfortunately.
But this one was based on a Tennessee Williams play.
Oh, yes,
James Coburn. It was called Bloodkin.
Yes.
But I missed the opening credits, and it was about a third of the way through before I realized it was you, because you played the American girl, and the accent was so perfect.
Oh, well,
I was convinced it was an American actress.
Well, thank you. I tried that was a southern accent I had to do, and I did, you know, somebody coached me a lot in it. Of course, it's easier for me now to play an American because living there, I've got the examples right around me. When I made that film, I was still living in England, and somebody who came from that part of the world came and coached, and we worked every single day on it. And by the time I got down there, it helped a lot.
That was a film in which you had an affair with a black man, and
yes.
It was filmed, I know, in Louisiana, and,
yes,
and
in
I gather
Baton
it
Rouge.
had a few headaches.
I imagine things have changed there now. I haven't really been in the South in America for some years, apart from just passing through, but this was 10 years ago, and I was staggered, having rehearsed in New York, having lived in England, that there was still an enormous amount of, you know, fright about black and white, and it was quite scary because here was my fellow actor who happened to be black, who I had, you know, I obviously was working with, had been working with for some time, and he would say to me, you know, incidentally, don't just, you know, touch me like that, or don't, you know, happen to be putting your arm around me, as, you know, how actors are hopelessly always touching each other. I can't think why, but we do for some reason. I think we always think we're going to not see each other for such a long time. They were always hugging and kissing. Well, there was none of that because it was very scary. We, in fact, had to take a script down that didn't include the part where he and I, you know, went off and had an affair. We sort of had a phony script, and we shot that part.
In case someone saw
yes, because now I think things have changed there. Please God they've changed there, because it was very, very frightening and awful for him, and it brought me up for the first time to a real feeling of what racial or racism is, and how frightening it can be, and how lucky I am, I suppose, not to have been on the receiving end of it.
What about New York, where you live? I mean, personally, I must say, I've never found New York any more violent than Glasgow or Birmingham or whatever, but we read such terrifying stories in the British press. How do you find
well,
it?
the press, not just the British press, but the press in general, I think, terribly exaggerate violence, disaster. I mean, they love a disaster, you know, to put it on the front. When the electricity was out in England, you know, reports in New York would have it that you couldn't walk down the street without having everything taken off you, and every shop window was broken, and it wasn't as bad as that, obviously. I find, I've lived in New York for 5 years, as I say, and there are places I wouldn't walk, but I tell you, a few weeks ago, after the major football match, walking along the Strand, or up west, as they say in London, those football crowds, I mean, I felt nearer to violence and harassment than I've ever felt in New York. You know, get a drunken football crowd off the train, and you can't even walk in an area in broad daylight without being jostled, without being pushed, without being a woman, you know, absolute obscenities coming your way. And I've never been subjected to that in New York, so I do think it's exaggerated, although the crime rate is, of course, very high, and the statistics are correct about that.
Of course, football crowds are notorious.
Yes.
We never get croquet hooligans, curious enough. It's always a soccer.
No, or tennis ones, you know, hitting each other over the head with tennis rackets or anything like that. What about a chess hooligan? Wouldn't it be great if after great chess tournaments, you know, and you had a Russian chessman and the American, you know, like Fischer and whoever it was, you know, and hitting each other with pawns and kings, you know, throwing them.
I must tell you that I was slightly apprehensive about interviewing you tonight because, well, I know that you used to do a chat show on American television.
Yes.
And
yes.
I mean, I'm not a great fan of American TV, where the commercials always seem to be better than the programs and pop up every 15 seconds.
Not on my program.
I was going to say, the one thing they do well as a chat show.
Yeah, they do a chat show very well. I mean, they do a lot of chat shows too. My particular chat show was not. It was interviewing people, but it wasn't a chat show in the way that you're having now. I mean, we would have to, ours was more of what they'd call a public affairs show. We would take a subject of some, usually rather a serious nature, let's say hospital care, might be childbirth, might be some sort of update on where things are with cancer care now. And we would have, there'd be 5 half-hours a week, and we would interview various experts who would usually be doctors, in some cases people who the particular thing had happened to, nurses, experts of some sort. And so my job as an interviewer was to really elicit information, not to be, it was entertaining in a way, in as much as useful information is entertaining to watch, but it was not an entertainment.
It was not simply conversation.
No, it was not simply that.
But funny enough, you know, I remember Jack Parr, who was the king of chat shows at one time, came across to Britain and did one of the shows here, and he kept telling jokes, and none of the audience laughed because there's a different style of humour. Until he got, you know how the chat show hosts in America do their own commercials? Yes. When he got the commercial and he said, "You'll wonder where the yellow went when you brush your teeth with Pepsi," then the audience fell about laughing, you know, which he found amazing. As he went, they kept every time we did a commercial, the roof came off, you know, but they never laughed at the jokes.
No, I know.
This is a question I've been sort of vying away from, but feel compelled to ask. Now, your sister Vanessa and your brother Colin indulge themselves in what I would personally consider to be extreme politics. Now, you've always kept away from that. Is it because you feel that politics and acting make an easy bedfellow?
I used to feel that. When I lived here, I did kind of feel that if you were an actor or a performer of any sort, or perhaps one should say in the public eye, unless the way you were in the public eye was in politics, in other words, you were a politician, one should keep the two separately, because actors, artists, performers, singers supposedly go through the barriers of what side of the fence they're on. However, living in America, although I'm not an American citizen, I've been able to see, I suppose, democracy at work in both its best and its worst terms too. And what I have noticed is that the public, the people, truly can, through force of their opinion, bring about great change. I think one of the great sadnesses in American history was the Watergate scandal, but the great strength of American democracy and its system was that it could be exposed in the way it was by force of the people finding it out. The ERA amendment, or the Equal Rights Amendment for Women, which is trying to be pushed through now, will undoubtedly be pushed through because enough people said this must happen. And I now feel that actors after all, are